Have you ever thought to yourself, hey, this shading stuff is really hard. How do I know what colors to choose? There's so many layers. Well, don't I have just the solution for you. Multiply layers. Let's start off with how it works, and then I'll show you how I use it to swiftly finish coloring my drawings. Take a cube, for example. First you have to either color in the cube by hand or select the area outside of the shape, invert it, and easily fill in the color, without worrying about drawing outside the lines. Then we make our first shading layer on top of the coloring layer, clip it to the layer underneath, and set the blending mode to multiply. This is where the magic happens. We can choose any color at all, in this case I chose blue, and start coloring one side. Since I want this to be our first shading layer, it should be quite a bit brighter, so just reduce the opacity. Then we make a second shading layer on top of this one, same procedure as earlier. Clip it to the layer underneath and set the blending mode to multiply. Here we can use the same color or a different one and color in the other side. We basically have a finished cube here, but I have a few more tricks. On Clip Studio Paint, you can press Ctrl U to access the Hue Saturation and Luminosity sliders. Here you can change the hue of the shading color, how bright it is, and how saturated it is. Literally just play around with these sliders. You can discover some awesome color combinations with the shading layers. Another tip is making shading gradients by locking the layer pixels and adding another layer into the mix, like I did here. My final tip is to erase a little bit of the corners of the shading layer with a soft airbrush after you're fully done coloring. On Clip Studio Paint, you can easily do this by selecting the airbrush and pressing C, or you can just use a very soft eraser. This adds a kind of either bounce light or rim light into your drawing, or it can be there just to add some easy blending. Now let us move to a fan art I worked on recently. First, I colored in the drawing with a basic color using the selection inverting technique. I then made a layer on top of it, clipped it, and added in the skin tone. After that, I did the same for the clothing. Now it was time for the shading. I made a layer on top of the base color layers, clipped it as always, and then set it to multiply. In this scenario, I picked purple to be my shading color, and just started shading in the whole drawing. Now this was quite too bright for being the first shading layer, so I just reduced the opacity. Then I made a layer on top, did the usual procedure, and started shading in with the same purple again. I had to reduce the opacity of this one as well because I didn't want the drawing to be too bright. After the coloring, I started messing with the Hue Saturation and Luminosity sliders. I decided on this reddish and orange-ish color scheme because I felt it just fit the character, not really much else to say. The fun thing about Multiply is that you don't need to pick different shading colors for different base colors. Multiply automatically reacts to the different hues. On the shading part, that's about it. I added some color to the eyes, added a rim lighting to the side where most of the shading is, soft airbrushed a bit of the skin shading color to the other side of his face, mixed up a few more details, and bam, we're done.